Sarah Jenkins sat at her kitchen table, absently stirring her cup of chamomile tea. The steam rose in lazy spirals as she scrolled through her phone, her dark fingers swiping past profile after profile on the dating app she had downloaded 3 weeks ago. At 32, she wasn't desperate for love, but her mother's constant reminders about settling down were getting harder to ignore. The soft glow of her phone illuminated her tired face. Working 12-hour shifts as a pediatric nurse at Atlanta General Hospital left her with little time for traditional dating. Her best friend Diana had convinced her to try online dating, insisting it was the modern way to find love. "What's the worst that could happen?" Diana had said. Now, after countless awkward conversations and failed attempts at connection, Sarah was beginning to wonder if this was all worth it. Just as she was about to close the app, a new profile caught her eye. The man's smile was what she noticed first, warm and genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. His name was Marcus Thompson, 35, and his first photo showed him seated in a wheelchair, but it wasn't presented as a sad thing. Instead, he was at a basketball court, coaching what looked like a youth team. Sarah found herself tapping on his profile to read more. His bio was refreshingly honest. Former firefighter turned adaptive sports coach. Looking for someone who can handle deep conversations and bad dad jokes. My wheelchair is part of my story, but it's not the whole story. Without overthinking it, she swiped right. To her surprise, it was an instant match. He had already liked her profile. A message popped up almost immediately. "I have to ask, in your photo, are you reading The Kite Runner? It's one of my favorite books." Sarah smiled, glancing at her profile picture where she sat in her favorite reading nook, a book in hand. Most men didn't even notice the book, let alone recognize it. She typed back, "Good eye, yes, it was my third time reading it. The storytelling gets me every time." That first message turned into hours of conversation. Marcus told her about his work with disabled youth, teaching them basketball and swimming. Sarah shared stories about her nursing career and the tiny patients who made even the hardest days worthwhile. They discovered they both loved old jazz music, spicy food, and had the same terrible sense of humor. Days turned into weeks of texting and phone calls. Sarah found herself looking forward to their nightly conversations after her shifts. Marcus would send her funny memes during her breaks, somehow knowing exactly when she needed a laugh. They talked about everything: their families, their dreams, their fears. One night, during a particularly long phone call, Marcus opened up about his disability. "I know some people see the wheelchair first and me second," he said. "But I've learned that those aren't the people I want in my life anyway." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "The wheelchair is just how you move through the world," she replied. "I'm more interested in who you are and how you think." Their conversations grew deeper. They discussed their experiences as Black Americans in their respective fields, the challenges they'd faced, and their hopes for the future. Marcus shared his passion for mentoring young people, especially those facing physical challenges. Sarah told him about her volunteer work at a free clinic in her neighborhood. After 3 weeks of digital connection, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced before, a sense of genuine understanding. It wasn't just attraction or compatibility. It was as if she'd found someone who spoke her emotional language. Then came the message she'd been both hoping for and nervous about. Marcus wrote, "I know this amazing little cafe called Sweet Auburn Bread Company. They make the best sweet potato pie in Atlanta. Would you like to meet there this Saturday? I promise I'm just as charming in person as I am over the phone, maybe even more so." Sarah's heart raced as she read the message. She had learned so much about this man, his kindness, his humor, his resilience. Yet there was still the nervous excitement of meeting face to face. After a moment's consideration, she typed her response. "I'd love to. And that's a bold claim about your charm. You'll have to prove it." They set the time for 2 p.m. that Saturday. As Sarah put down her phone, she couldn't help but smile. Something told her this meeting would be different from any other first date she'd been on. Little did she know, fate had woven their lives together in ways she couldn't yet imagine, and their first meeting would reveal a connection that would change both their lives forever. The Sweet Auburn Bread Company buzzed with its usual Saturday afternoon energy. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She chose a table near the entrance where Marcus would easily spot her, smoothing her yellow sundress as she sat down. The smell of fresh-baked pies filled the air, mixing with the rich aroma of coffee. Sarah checked her phone again, rereading Marcus's last message. Looking forward to finally meeting you. I'll be wearing a blue button-down shirt. She had spent hours getting ready, wanting everything to be perfect. Her friend Diana had teased her about being so nervous over a first date, but something about Marcus felt different. At exactly 2 p.m., the cafe's door opened. Sarah looked up and saw him, Marcus Thompson, exactly as his photos had shown him, wearing a crisp blue shirt and an infectious smile. He skillfully maneuvered his wheelchair through the tables, heading straight toward her. But as he got closer, something strange happened. Sarah's smile froze on her face. Her hands began to shake. That face. She knew that face. 5 years ago, she had seen it in a hospital bed, covered in burns and bandages. The memory hit her like a wave, the terrible night of the fire, the frantic drive to the hospital, her brother Michael's smoke-filled lungs, and the whispered conversations about the brave firefighter who had saved him. Marcus reached her table, still smiling. "Sarah, it's so great to finally meet you in person." But he noticed her expression and his smile faded. "Is everything okay?" Sarah couldn't speak for a moment. Her mind was racing through the memories. The news reports about the heroic firefighter who had gone back into the burning building to save a young man trapped on the third floor. The same firefighter who had suffered a spinal cord injury when part of the building collapsed. The firefighter whose name she had never known because everything had happened so fast, and her focus had been entirely on her brother. "You," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're the one who saved my brother, Michael. The fire on Auburn Avenue, 5 years ago." Now it was Marcus's turn to look shocked. His hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests tighter. "Michael Jenkins?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "The college student from the third floor?" Sarah nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "He was trapped in his apartment. You went back in for him when everyone else said it was too dangerous." The cafe seemed to fade away around them as they both processed this incredible coincidence. Marcus moved his wheelchair closer to the table, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "I never knew what happened to him after that night," he said softly. "They took me straight to the trauma center, and by the time I was conscious enough to ask—" "He lived," Sarah interrupted, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You saved his life. He's a high school teacher now, married with a baby on the way." She reached across the table and took Marcus's hand. "We tried to find out who you were, to thank you, but everything was so chaotic. The hospital wouldn't give us information, and then we heard you had been transferred to a specialty center." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I think about that night sometimes," he admitted. "Not with regret. I'd make the same choice again. But I always wondered about the young man I carried out, your brother." The server approached their table, then quietly backed away, sensing the intensity of the moment. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off Marcus's face, seeing it now in a completely new light. The man she had spent weeks getting to know online was also the hero who had saved her family from unimaginable grief. "Michael's going to be shocked," Sarah said, finally breaking into a small laugh despite her tears. "He's never stopped talking about the firefighter who saved him. He even named his dog Hero." Marcus chuckled, the tension breaking slightly. "Well, that's better than some of the nicknames I've had." He paused, looking at their still-joined hands. "I have to ask, does this change things? Between us, I mean." Sarah took a deep breath, considering the question. The universe had somehow brought them together twice. First on that terrible night 5 years ago, and now here, in this cozy cafe. "It changes things," she said slowly, "but not in the way you might think. I already knew you were special, Marcus. This just proves I was right." The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow over their table. What had started as a simple first date had transformed into something far more meaningful, a moment of discovery that would forever change both their lives. Their love story, it seemed, had begun long before either of them knew it. After their shocking discovery at the cafe, Sarah and Marcus decided to take a quiet walk in the nearby park. Marcus's wheelchair glided smoothly along the paved path while Sarah walked beside him, both of them lost in thoughts about that life-changing night 5 years ago. "Tell me what happened," Sarah said softly. "From your side, I only know what I saw at the hospital afterward." Marcus took a deep breath, his hands resting still on his wheelchair wheels. "It was supposed to be a routine night shift," he began. We got the call around 2 a.m. When we arrived, the building was already badly on fire. The first floor was completely engulfed. Sarah remembered that night clearly too. She had been woken up by a frantic call from Michael's roommate, telling her that their apartment building was on fire and Michael hadn't made it out. We evacuated most of the residents quickly. Marcus continued, his voice growing quieter. But then someone shouted that there was still a person trapped on the third floor. Your brother's roommate was screaming that Michael was still inside. They stopped near a small pond where ducks swam peacefully, completely unaware of the heavy conversation happening nearby. Sarah sat on a bench next to Marcus's wheelchair. The fire chief ordered us not to go in, Marcus said, shaking his head at the memory. The building's structure was compromised, but I couldn't just stand there. I kept thinking about how someone's son was up there. I didn't even stop to think. I just went. Sarah wiped away a tear. Michael told me he was unconscious when you found him. The smoke. Yes, Marcus nodded. He was passed out near the bathroom. The smoke was so thick I could barely see, but I kept crawling along the floor, checking every room. When I found him, I just knew I had to get him out fast. The memory of what happened next made Marcus pause. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. I got him to the window where the ladder was waiting, he said. Just as I was handing him to my colleague, I heard this horrible cracking sound. The floor. Marcus's voice trailed off for a moment. The floor gave way. I remember falling, and then nothing until I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. Sarah's grip on his hand tightened. I was at the hospital that whole time, she said. Michael was in the ICU for smoke inhalation. They wouldn't tell us anything about the firefighter who saved him, just that he was in critical condition. Those first few days are mostly a blur, Marcus admitted. When they told me about the spinal cord injury, that I'd never walk again. Honestly, all I could think about was whether the person I'd gone in for had made it out alive. You never knew? Sarah asked, her heart aching for both the pain he'd endured and the uncertainty he'd lived with. Marcus shook his head. By the time I was clear-headed enough to ask questions, I'd been transferred to the rehabilitation center in Birmingham. Life became all about learning to live with my new reality. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, learning to do everything differently. But you survived, Sarah said softly. And you helped Michael survive. You gave our family more years with him, gave him the chance to become a teacher, to get married, to become a father soon. A small smile crossed Marcus's face. Life has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it? I lost my career as a firefighter that night, but I found a new purpose working with disabled youth. And now, somehow, it's led me to you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park. A cool breeze rustled the leaves above them, nature's gentle reminder that life goes on, that new beginnings can emerge from the ashes of the past. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked carefully, going back into that building? Marcus turned to look at her, his eyes clear and certain. Never, not for a single moment. That decision changed my life completely, but sitting here with you now, how could I regret something that ultimately brought us together? Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but these were different from the shocked tears at the cafe. These were tears of gratitude, of amazement at how fate had woven their lives together in such an unexpected way. You know, she said with a gentle smile, I think we need to arrange a proper reunion with Michael. He's going to be overwhelmed when he finds out who his sister is dating. Marcus laughed, the sound bright and hopeful. Dating? Huh. So this revelation hasn't scared you away? Marcus Thompson, Sarah said firmly, I think it's done exactly the opposite. In the weeks that followed their remarkable first meeting, Sarah and Marcus's relationship blossomed in ways neither of them had expected. Their shared connection through Michael's rescue gave their romance a depth that felt almost like destiny, but they were also discovering the everyday joys and challenges of building a life together. One sunny Saturday morning, Sarah arrived at Marcus's apartment with breakfast and coffee. She had grown comfortable with his building's accessibility features, the wide doorways, the special elevator, the ramps that made it easy for Marcus to move around independently. As she walked in, she found him doing his morning exercises, his strong arms lifting weights that helped him maintain his upper body strength. Sorry, I'm running a bit late with my routine, Marcus said, wiping his face with a towel. These exercises keep me strong enough to transfer in and out of my chair easily. Sarah sat down on the couch, watching him with admiration. Don't apologize. I love seeing you take care of yourself. She had learned a lot about living with a disability through Marcus, and each day brought new understanding. After finishing his exercises, Marcus wheeled over to join her for breakfast. They had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, with Sarah naturally placing things within his reach without making a show of it. It was these small moments of understanding that meant the most to both of them. I've been thinking, Marcus said, taking a sip of coffee. Would you like to come to one of my adaptive sports classes? The kids have been asking about the nurse I keep talking about. Sarah's face lit up. I'd love to, though I warn you, I'm terrible at basketball. Don't worry, Marcus grinned. These kids will teach you everything you need to know. They're the real coaches. The following Tuesday, Sarah visited the community center where Marcus worked. She watched in awe as he coached a group of young people with various disabilities, teaching them not just basketball skills, but confidence and self-acceptance. His wheelchair wasn't a limitation. It was a connection point between him and his students. Coach Marcus, a young girl called out, wheeling over to them. Is this your girlfriend? Marcus smiled proudly. Yes, this is Sarah. Sarah, meet Maya, our team's best three-point shooter. Sarah spent the afternoon learning from the kids, their energy and resilience touching her heart. She saw a side of Marcus she hadn't known before, a natural leader who inspired others to see beyond their limitations. Later that evening, as they shared dinner at Sarah's apartment, Marcus grew quiet. Sometimes I worry, he admitted, about being enough, about whether it's fair to ask someone to take on the challenges that come with my disability. Sarah put down her fork and reached for his hand. Marcus, do you know what I saw today? I saw someone who has taken what could have been the worst moment of their life and turned it into inspiration for others. You're more than enough. But their relationship wasn't without its challenges. They had to navigate physical intimacy carefully, learning what worked for them. They dealt with stares from strangers who didn't understand their love. And there were practical matters too, planning dates around accessibility, managing medical appointments, and learning each other's needs and limitations. One evening, while they were watching old jazz performances on YouTube, their shared passion, Marcus turned to Sarah. You make everything feel possible, he said softly. When I'm with you, I don't feel disabled. I just feel loved. Sarah moved closer to him on the couch. That's because you are loved, and not in spite of anything, you're loved for exactly who you are. Their relationship grew stronger each day, built on a foundation of understanding, patience, and deep respect. Sarah learned to anticipate Marcus's needs without making him feel dependent, while Marcus showed her a kind of strength she had never known before. They created new traditions together. Sunday morning rolls in the park, adaptive cooking sessions where they experimented with different ways to make their favorite meals, and weekly video calls with Michael, who had become one of Marcus's closest friends. As autumn approached, bringing cooler weather and changing leaves, Sarah and Marcus found themselves talking more about the future. Neither of them rushed these conversations. They knew their love story was unique, built on a miracle that had brought them together twice. You know, Marcus said one evening as they watched the sunset from his balcony, saving your brother might have been the best decision I ever made, even if I didn't know it at the time. Sarah squeezed his shoulder gently. Sometimes the best things in life come from the moments that test us the most. Their love was growing into something beautiful and unshakable, proving that true connection knows no boundaries and that the heart sees far beyond physical limitations. The day of the big family dinner arrived, and Sarah's stomach was in knots. She had finally arranged for Marcus to meet her entire family, including Michael, who still didn't know the full story. Her parents had set up their dining room to be wheelchair accessible, moving furniture and creating clear paths just as Sarah had suggested. At 6 o'clock, Sarah and Marcus arrived at her parents' home in Atlanta's historic West End neighborhood. The familiar scent of her mother's cooking filled the air. Sunday dinner classics like mac and cheese, collard greens, and fried chicken. Marcus carried a bouquet of flowers for Sarah's mother and a bottle of wine for her father. Ready? Sarah asked, squeezing Marcus's shoulder gently before they went in. As I'll ever be, Marcus replied with a nervous smile. The door opened, and Sarah's mother, Mrs. Jenkins, welcomed them with warm hugs. She bent down naturally to embrace Marcus, making him feel immediately at ease. Sarah's father, a tall man with kind eyes, shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Welcome to our home, son," Mr. Jenkins said. "We've heard so much about you." But the real moment they were waiting for came when Michael walked in from the kitchen. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes growing wide as he stared at Marcus. The room fell silent. It's you," Michael whispered, recognition dawning on his face. "The firefighter. You're the one who—" Marcus wheeled forward slightly. "Hello, Michael. It's been a long time." Michael's legs seemed to give out as he sank into the nearest chair. His wife, Rachel, rushed to his side, confused by his reaction. "I don't understand," Mrs. Jenkins said, looking between her children and Marcus. "What's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad. Marcus is the firefighter who saved Michael from the fire 5 years ago, the one who was injured saving him." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Mrs. Jenkins covered her mouth with her hands, tears forming in her eyes. Mr. Jenkins gripped the back of a chair, his face showing a mix of shock and emotion. Michael finally stood up, his hands shaking. "All these years, I've wanted to thank you, to tell you how sorry I am about what happened to you because of me." "Michael, no," Marcus said firmly. "What happened wasn't your fault. I made a choice that night, and I've never regretted it." Mrs. Jenkins wiped her tears and hurried to the kitchen, returning with a chair which she placed next to Marcus. "Michael, sit down. We all need to talk." Over dinner, the story came out from all sides. Michael shared his memories of that night, though they were hazy from the smoke. He told everyone how the guilt had eaten at him, how he tried to find out who had saved him but kept hitting dead ends. "I named my dog Hero because of you," Michael admitted, making everyone laugh through their tears. "I never knew your name, but I wanted to honor you somehow." Marcus shared his side too, talking about his recovery and how it led him to his work with disabled youth. He saw the pain in Michael's eyes and knew he had to address it directly. "Listen," Marcus said, looking straight at Michael. "That night changed both our lives. But look at where we are now. You're a teacher, helping kids every day. You're about to be a father. And somehow, through all of this, I found my way to your sister. That's not tragedy. That's a miracle." Sarah watched as her brother's shoulders finally relaxed, years of guilt beginning to lift. Her parents couldn't stop looking at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "Well," Mrs. Jenkins said, trying to lighten the mood as she served dessert, "I guess God had a plan all along. He just took his time showing us what it was." As the evening went on, the initial shock wore off, and the family began to feel more natural together. Michael and Marcus talked about basketball, discovering they both loved the same team. Mr. Jenkins asked Marcus about his work, genuinely interested in his adaptive sports program. Before they left that night, Mrs. Jenkins hugged Marcus again. "You saved our son once," she whispered. "And now you're making our daughter happier than we've ever seen her. Your family now, whether you like it or not." On the drive home, Sarah noticed Marcus was quieter than usual. "Everything okay?" she asked. Marcus smiled, taking her hand. "Better than okay. You know, I spent years wondering if that night was worth everything that came after. Now I know it was worth every second." Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding that sometimes the biggest challenges in life lead to the most beautiful rewards. 6 months after the family dinner, Marcus found himself outside the Atlanta Fire Station 16, his old workplace. He had arranged everything carefully with his former colleagues, though Sarah thought they were just attending a community event. His heart raced as he checked his pocket for the 100th time, making sure the ring was still there. Sarah pulled into the fire station's parking lot, excited about the event Marcus had told her about. "A fundraiser for youth sports programs. That's such a great idea," she said, helping Marcus transfer from the car to his wheelchair. The station looked different from when Marcus had worked there, newly painted and renovated, but the spirit of brotherhood remained the same. As they approached the entrance, Chief Rodriguez, Marcus's old boss, came out to greet them. "Marcus, Sarah, right on time," the chief said with a knowing smile. He led them into the station, where Sarah was surprised to see not a fundraiser setup, but something entirely different. The station's main bay was decorated with twinkling lights and flowers. Fire trucks had been moved to create an open space, and in that space stood both their families, Sarah's parents, Michael and his wife with their new baby, Marcus's parents, sister, and his former firefighting crew, all dressed up and smiling. "Marcus." Sarah turned to him, confusion clear on her face. "What's going on?" Marcus wheeled forward into the center of the space. The floor had been marked with the same path he had taken 5 years ago when he ran into the burning building to save Michael. Rose petals now covered that path. "Sarah," Marcus began, his voice strong despite his nerves. "5 years ago, I ran through this station and out those doors to what would be my last fire call as a firefighter. That night changed everything for me. It took away my ability to walk, but it also set me on a path that would eventually lead me to you." Sarah's hands covered her mouth as she realized what was happening. Tears began forming in her eyes. "I've thought a lot about destiny," Marcus continued, reaching for her hand. "About how one moment can change the course of your whole life. That night, I thought I was just doing my job, but I was actually taking the first step toward finding my soulmate." Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, holding something in his hands. Marcus's old firefighter helmet, polished and gleaming. Inside it nestled a small velvet box. "When I was a firefighter," Marcus said, taking the box from his helmet, "I learned that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. Loving you has taught me that same lesson in a different way. Every day, you show me what real courage looks like, the courage to love completely, to accept unconditionally, to face whatever comes next together." With practiced skill, Marcus opened the box, revealing a beautiful engagement ring with a sapphire stone, the same deep blue as the firefighter's uniform he once wore. "Sarah Jenkins, you've made me believe in second chances and in miracles. You've shown me that sometimes losing one dream just means making room for a better one. Will you marry me?" The station fell silent as everyone waited for Sarah's response. She knelt down beside Marcus's wheelchair, tears streaming down her face but with a smile that lit up the room. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The station erupted in cheers as Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger. Michael was the first to reach them, hugging them both, his own eyes wet with tears. "Now you're really going to be my brother," he said to Marcus. Mrs. Jenkins was crying openly, while Mr. Jenkins tried to pretend something had gotten in his eye. Marcus's old crew started up the station's sirens in celebration, a firefighter's salute to love found among the ashes of what was lost. As their families gathered around them with congratulations and hugs, Marcus looked up at Sarah, now his fiancée. "I hope you don't mind that I planned all this behind your back." Sarah leaned down to kiss him, not caring who was watching. "It's perfect," she said. "This place, these people, they're part of our story. I couldn't imagine a better beginning to our next chapter." Outside the station, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, much like the colors of the fire that had first brought their paths together. But this time, instead of marking an ending, these colors celebrated a new beginning. The months leading up to Sarah and Marcus's wedding were filled with both joy and challenges. As they sat in their favorite coffee shop looking through wedding venues, they quickly realized that planning an accessible wedding required extra thought and care. "This place looks beautiful," Sarah said, showing Marcus pictures of a historic Atlanta mansion on her tablet. "But—" "No ramps," Marcus finished her sentence, a small smile on his face. "And probably narrow doorways, too." They had already faced some uncomfortable moments during their venue search. One wedding planner had suggested Marcus use a regular chair for the ceremony to look more normal in photos. Sarah had walked out immediately, holding back angry tears. "You know what?" Sarah said, closing her tablet. "Let's do something different. Something that represents us." That's how they found themselves touring the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, which not only had beautiful accessible paths throughout, but also held special meaning. It was where Marcus had taken many of his adaptive sports students for outdoor activities. "This could work," Marcus said, his eyes lighting up as they explored the garden's grand pavilion. "Look, they even have smooth paths for the processional." As word spread about their upcoming wedding, they received mostly loving support, but also faced some unwanted opinions. Sarah's old college friend wondered aloud if she was settling. Marcus's aunt kept sending him articles about miracle cures and walking again. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of planning, Sarah found Marcus in his apartment, looking at old photos of himself in his firefighter uniform. "Hey," she said softly, sitting beside him. Penny for your thoughts? Marcus put down the photo. Just thinking about how different our wedding will be from what I once imagined. No carrying my bride over the threshold, no first dance the way most people expect. Sarah took his hand. Good, because we're not most people. Our love story isn't like anyone else's, so why should our wedding be? Together, they began planning a ceremony that celebrated their unique journey. They chose elements that honored both their cultures and their story. Instead of traditional wedding colors, they chose the blue of firefighter uniforms and the white of nurses' scrubs. Sarah's mother threw herself into helping, learning everything she could about making events accessible. She even joined an online support group for families of people with disabilities to better understand their needs. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," Sarah said one day, watching her mother measure doorways at the garden venue. "Baby, when you love someone, you love all of them," her mother replied. "Marcus is family now, and we take care of family." Michael insisted on being Marcus's best man, and together they planned bachelor party activities that everyone could participate in. They settled on a basketball tournament at Marcus's sports center where his students would join in the fun. The wedding dress shopping brought its own considerations. Sarah chose a dress that would look beautiful whether she was standing or sitting next to Marcus in his wheelchair. The seamstress understood perfectly, making adjustments so the dress would flow elegantly in all scenarios. One day, during a dance practice session, Marcus surprised Sarah by showing her how he had been working with his physical therapist on a modified first dance. "We may not be able to do a traditional slow dance," he said, demonstrating how he could spin his wheelchair in time with the music, but we can create our own kind of magic. Sarah practiced with him, learning how to move in harmony with his chair, creating a dance that was uniquely theirs. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when they showed their families during rehearsal. As the wedding day approached, they faced one final challenge. Some extended family members declined their invitation, uncomfortable with what they called an unusual marriage. But for every person who stepped back, others stepped forward. Marcus's adaptive sports students asked to form an honor guard with their wheelchairs. Sarah's hospital colleagues organized a surprise bridal shower that carefully considered Marcus's accessibility needs. "You know what I love most about planning this wedding?" Sarah said one evening as they finalized the seating arrangements. "We're not just planning a ceremony. We're showing people what true love looks like, without limitations, without conditions." Marcus smiled, pulling her onto his lap in his wheelchair. "And we're just getting started," he said, kissing her softly. Their wedding preparations became more than just planning a single day. They were creating a template for how love could transcend any barrier, break any stereotype, and build something beautiful from life's unexpected turns. The wedding day dawned bright and clear at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. Early morning sunlight filtered through the trees, making the dewdrops sparkle on the flowers. The accessible paths had been decorated with blue and white ribbons, and chairs were arranged in a semicircle to ensure everyone had a clear view. Marcus was in a special groom's room, adjusting his bow tie. His wheelchair had been decorated with subtle blue ribbons matching his black tuxedo. Michael stood beside him, helping with the final touches. "Nervous?" Michael asked, straightening Marcus's boutonniere. "Not about marrying Sarah," Marcus smiled. "Just hoping everything goes smoothly with the surprise we planned." In another room, Sarah stood in her flowing white dress, which had been perfectly designed to cascade beautifully whether she was standing or sitting next to Marcus. Her mother was fixing her veil, trying not to cry and ruin her makeup. "Baby," Mrs. Jenkins said, "I've never seen a love like yours and Marcus's. It's the kind of love that makes other people believe in miracles." The ceremony space filled with guests. Marcus's adaptive sports students in their wheelchairs forming an honor guard, his old firefighting crew in their dress uniforms, Sarah's hospital colleagues, and family members from both sides. The garden's grand pavilion had never looked more beautiful. As the music began, Marcus took his place at the front. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Sarah walking down the aisle. She was radiant, her smile brighter than any fire he'd ever seen. Mr. Jenkins walked beside her, proud tears in his eyes. The minister, who had worked with them to create a ceremony that celebrated their unique journey, began speaking. "We are gathered here today to witness a love story that proves that sometimes life's greatest challenges lead us to our greatest blessings." During the vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Sarah spoke first, her voice clear and strong. "Marcus, You rolled into my life and showed me what true courage looks like. You taught me that love doesn't need to follow anyone else's rules. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your biggest supporter, today and always." Marcus's voice shook slightly as he replied, "Sarah, you saw me for who I am, not what I lost. You showed me that sometimes you have to lose your way to find your true path. I promise to love you, support your dreams, and remind you every day why you chose me." Then came the moment they had planned in secret. As they prepared to exchange rings, Marcus pressed a button on his wheelchair. A special mechanical lift, designed by his engineer friend, slowly raised him to a standing position, supported by braces. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Marcus, now at eye level with her, took her hand. They had practiced this moment for weeks with his physical therapist, making sure he could safely stand for just long enough to place the ring on her finger. "I might not be able to walk down life's path with you," Marcus said softly, "but I'll always rise to meet you halfway." After they were pronounced husband and wife, Marcus remained standing for their first kiss as a married couple. The garden erupted in cheers and applause. Michael was sobbing openly, remembering how his life was saved by the man who was now officially his brother-in-law. At the reception, Marcus and Sarah performed their specially choreographed first dance, his wheelchair and her movements in perfect harmony. They had practiced for months, and it showed. Their dance was a beautiful demonstration of how love adapts and finds its own way to express itself. Later, as evening fell and the garden twinkled with strings of lights, Sarah sat on Marcus's lap as they greeted their guests. His old fire chief raised a toast to Marcus and Sarah, who proved that the bravest acts of heroism sometimes lead to the greatest love stories. As the celebration continued around them, Marcus and Sarah took a quiet moment in the garden. The same paths where they had planned their wedding now stretched before them, leading to their future together. "Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Thompson?" Marcus asked, squeezing her hand. Sarah leaned down to kiss him. "With you, always." They had shown the world that true love knows no boundaries, that life's greatest challenges can become its greatest gifts, and that sometimes the most beautiful love stories don't follow the usual path, they create their own. Their wedding day wasn't just an ending to their courtship, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together, on their own terms, wheeling and walking side by side into their future.